Hi everyone, Samir and Sumit here, and welcome back to our F1 podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2024 Hungarian Grand Prix.
Yeah, and this was certainly as we've seen so far throughout this season, the races just keep on delivering and delivering, and now I think it's safe to say that F1 is truly back.
Yeah, like it feels like after every race we're saying this is like the
Yeah.
best race of the year, and I mean it just shows like I guess F1 wanted to treat us after the boring year of
Mm-hmm.
2023. Now we
Yeah.
got such a great year ahead of us, and I'm really excited for the races to follow.
Yeah, so the main talking points were going into this weekend were whether Red Bull could bounce back from a somewhat disappointing Silverstone weekend. Obviously, Mercedes would be on the up to continue their form of 2 wins in a row to make it three, hopefully. McLaren, after horrendously bottling that win, they would certainly be looking to bounce back in style. But I think the man under the most pressure going into this weekend was for once not Sargent, but actually Sergio Perez, because he has 2 races left to deliver to prove to Red Bull why they should keep him for after the summer break.
Yeah, there were a lot of rumors going into this weekend that Sergio Perez had like performance clauses in his contract where he couldn't be 100 points behind Verstappen by the summer
Yeah.
break, so after Belgium, or he couldn't be like more than 5 places behind him in the World Championship.
Mm-hmm.
And Perez currently is breaking both of those clauses. So there was a lot of rumors and talks about like him being replaced after Belgium by Ricardo, Lawson, or Sonoda.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he would definitely have to step up this weekend.
Yeah, so going on into Hungary, a completely different circuit compared to Silverstone, where you don't really need as much straight line speed as Silverstone, but you need to have a good downforce package. And we've seen so far that McLaren so far seem to be the better car when it comes to having more downforce because the Red Bull kind of struggles when it comes to things such as riding the curbs. In Hungary, you have to use the curbs quite a bit.
Yeah, they often call Hungary the Monaco without barriers, and
Yeah,
obviously we saw Red Bull struggle a lot at Monaco.
yeah.
They did struggle a lot because of the bumps and stuff, but while this doesn't have nearly as many bumps as Monaco, it still has like the same unique set of corners and challenges. So Red Bull would be thinking they would be on the back foot here.
Yeah, so in FP1, we saw Ferrari look pretty quick with Carlos Sainz, and even Charles Leclerc was there in P3, and Max Verstappen up there in P2 for Red Bull. So far, it actually looked like that Ferrari and Red Bull were quicker than McLaren, but of course it's just FP1, and also Zhou Guanyu was up there in P5, so maybe these times weren't as representative as we would see throughout the weekend, but as of now, they were just getting used to the track and stuff.
Yeah, but we do know Joe Guan Yu likes this track. He
Yeah.
qualified fifth here, remember, last year. So
Yeah,
he does have a lot of pace around the Hungaroring. And
yeah,
I think we shouldn't count him out of potentially delivering Kick Sauber's highest qualifying this season.
yeah. Maybe getting their first points of the year too. So it would be an important weekend for Zhou Guanyu as well. Of course, he's one of the drivers that's also looking for a seat next year, along with the many others. But Zhou Guanyu definitely he's one of those in those situations where there aren't really any rumors linked to him. So that's kind of how you know when a driver isn't really being wanted by any teams and is when there's no rumors really flying about them. Obviously, same thing with Sargent, but even him, we've heard that he's going to IndyCar and stuff like that. But for Joe Guanyu, there's kind of been nothing about him.
Yeah, so while you said like you said the McLarens, Ferraris and Mercedes looked well around here, Red Bull also looked kind of decent, but Aston Martin, who had brought significant upgrades to their
Yeah,
cars for Hungary, both drivers found the car quite shocking, as Lance Stroll put it.
yeah.
And Alonso, we heard when they asked is there any feedback we can use for the other
Mhm.
car, Alonso just said, "Yeah, good luck." So
Yeah.
both drivers clearly really, really unhappy with the performance of the new upgrade.
Yeah, and just like the commentator on Sky Sports F1 said during this session, this is like exactly kind of not what Alonso was hoping for when he re-signed for Aston Martin. He would be hoping for the 2023 Aston Martin that we saw fighting regularly for podiums and stuff. So this is kind of the old Fernando that we've seen back in the McLaren Honda days when he's just been given a car that can't really do anything. So hopefully they can improve soon, or else Fernando might do what he did after McLaren and just retire from F1 again.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's waiting for the
Yeah,
Honda engine though.
yeah,
So we'll see about that. But then finally for FP1, the other main thing was the two Haas cars were also looking kind of like we were trying to figure out where their pace was because Hulkenberg obviously came off the back of a really impressive
Yeah.
P6, like two P6s in a row. So we want to see whether Hulkenberg can continue that trajectory. But then also obviously going into this weekend, Kevin Magnussen announced he wouldn't be re-signing with Haas. And
Yeah.
so that left the seat open, and obviously Esteban Ocon was the driver linked highest to filling that seat, but we'd have to
Mm-hmm.
wait and see for that. So of course Kevin Magnussen came back with Haas in 2022 after they dropped him in 2020, and
Yeah.
now he's being dropped a second time.
Yeah, I feel bad for him because he's kind of when you think of Haas, you think of Kevin Magnus, and he's been there almost from season one when they came in, but he's just been such a staple character in them growing as a team. He's been one of the key drivers, scoring major points for them, and just to be dropped from him seems a little bit disappointing. And of course, when you see the driver that's supposed to replace him, Esteban Ocon, in my opinion, if there's one driver you don't want near like to be pairing up with a rookie, it's Esteban Ocon in my opinion. We've just seen time in and time out again, just Ocon doesn't like to fight his or will do anything to get past his teammate. He doesn't like to just wave his teammate by and stuff. We saw it with Fernando Alonso. We saw it with Pierre Gasly, and if he's the driver to go to Haas alongside Ollie Behrman, it could just stunt Haas's performance in general.
Obviously, Haas don't have a good track record with their rookies,
Yeah,
so we hopefully wish all the best to Ollie Behrman
yeah.
for his growth. But now going on into FP2, then Lando Norris confirmed McLaren's pace as
Hmm.
Norris was absolutely flying. His I remember seeing the onboards and stuff. His car just looked so hooked up through all of
Yeah.
like sector two, the like tricky set of corners and stuff, different challenges, high speed,
Hmm.
low speed, all that. And so versus like Verstappen's onboard, he looked like he was just wrestling the car time and
Yeah.
time again. So McLaren definitely looked like the favorites come going into qualifying.
Yeah, and another major thing we saw in FP2 was Charles Leclerc lose the rear end of his Ferrari going at the infamous turn four, that high speed left hander. He ran a little bit wide and lost the rear of his Ferrari and went into the barriers right there. Luckily it wasn't too much damage to like his suspension or anything, but certainly a whack for the rear wing and the gearbox and stuff. So it was enough damage to bring out the red flag and to end his session.
Yep, and another same thing at turn four, we saw Joe Guan Yu have a nasty spin there.
Yeah.
He almost hit the Red Bull of Sergio Perez.
Hmm.
Joe looked like he was complaining about Perez being in the way, and I can kind of see both arguments about that because from Perez's view, he was way ahead of Joe, so Perez felt like he didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, turn four on the exit of turn four, so high speed, Joe was just closing in
Hmm.
significantly on Sergio Perez. So
Yeah.
it was definitely unsettling to see a car right there, because especially turn four is really blind. So I can see an argument for both drivers, and that's why I think that stewards decided no further investigation.
Yeah, so to round out FP two, then it was Lando Norris at the top, and Verstappen was there 2 tenths back from Lando Norris. So maybe that would be a sign of qualifying. But then Carlos Sainz was up there for Ferrari too. So Ferrari is showing some pace, but obviously we failed to see that from Leclerc. But Sainz, although he was almost 4 tenths back from his from Lando Norris in P1, but we would have to see come qualifying. Perez was up there in P4, which is just exactly what Red Bull need. So he would be hoping to deliver that same performance in qualifying. Then came Russell in fifth, Magnussen in sixth, Hamilton in seventh down there for Mercedes. Not where he would want to be come qualifying. Ricardo in P8, that would probably where he want to be for qualifying because with RB scoring little by little points towards the last few races. Ricardo's kind of been on the up and with Perez struggling a little bit. This would be perfect for Ricardo if he could just keep building on this momentum if he wants a return back to the Red Bull team. Then came Albon in ninth and then Alonso in 10th, so not at all where Aston Martin would want to be. But we would have to see come FP3 in qualifying whether they would make changes overnight.
So going into FP3, then it was basically McLaren just cementing themselves as the favorite, as
Yeah.
Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri finished 1 and 2 in FP3, and their cars were just dialed in. The drivers were dialed in. Everything was
Hmm.
working well for them. They seemed to
Yeah.
be treating their tires well. They seemed to be just riding all the curbs nicely, and everything was just going their way. So McLaren was definitely the team to beat, but while Red Bull had a lot of work ahead of them.
Yeah. Um, McLaren were 1 and 2, which is like very surprising. We've seen McLaren kind of show their true form in qualifying. We've never seen them be this dominant in practice like we've seen so far. But Verstappen was up there for Red Bull in P3, 2 tenths back from Lando Norris. But Sergio Perez was pretty far down the order, only in P13. So he would have a lot of work to do come qualifying, or else it would be looking pretty bad for him.
Obviously, Verstappen's running a different like engine cover spec compared to
Yeah.
Perez, because it's supposed to be quicker, and I think it
Hmm.
was quicker in Verstappen's hands, but Red Bull just didn't want to take the risk with giving it to Perez as well, because
Hmm.
he was already struggling and crashing, and so they didn't want to like risk breaking the part, but also risk hindering his performance anymore. And so also in this session we saw both Mercedes and Ferraris actually struggling quite a bit.
Yeah.
We saw Lewis Hamilton have a spin. I think it was somewhere like turn 8, turn 9, and then we saw Carlos Sainz have a big snap of oversteer at the exit of turn 4. So there was just a bunch of stuff going on. Like we also saw Leclerc would needed to dial in after missing a lot of FP2. So just McLaren or Mercedes and Ferrari slipping back quite a bit, which was surprising to see.
Yeah. And RB were also on the up in this practice session. They would be looking to build on their momentum from the previous rounds to score points race after race to fight for that seventh place in the championship again, or the battle at the bottom. But Sonoda would be looking to show Red Bull that he's worthy of promotion. Ricardo would be working to show that he's also worthy of promotion. But both RBs were going really well, and at the moment it looked like Ricardo was the better of the two RBs. Of course, Ricardo's been racing here a lot longer than Sonoda. He's won here too. So Ricardo seems to have that edge over Sonoda.
Yeah, and now it's going to be interesting to see because we're entering that part of the season where Ricardo has raced these few tracks
Yeah.
continuously since last year, because obviously Hungary is where he debuted last year to replace Nick De Vries. So
Hmm.
maybe that would give Ricardo another edge, just kind of knowing that like he's raced there continuously still. He
Yeah.
hasn't taken the sabbatical and missed like the last year's race of like the previous races we've had earlier in the season.
Hmm.
Obviously, then he broke his hand, so he missed like the next few races we have after the summer break.
Hmm.
But still, we're getting into that. The second half of the season again is gonna make things a lot tighter, not just with RB but also with other pairings.
Yeah, so now going into qualifying then, and we would see now whether McLaren's pace was truly there. So going into Q1 then, it was raining a little bit at the beginning of the session, but the track quickly dried out, and we saw drivers now setting their times. And Carlos Sainz at the moment was at the top, but Hamilton quickly beat that by a tenth of a second. And we saw like a few shock drivers up there. We saw Sargent actually was up there in P4, surprisingly, ahead of not one but two Red Bulls. So it was actually pretty impressive time from Sargent, but of course it's just Q1 and stuff could happen.
Yeah, obviously the track was raining. It was raining on the track
Yeah.
before Q1, and so even at the beginning of Q1. So after it stopped raining, drivers was just constantly out there, just trying to
Yeah.
dry up the track and then find continuously more grip. So we
Mhm.
saw, like you said, Lewis Hamilton go even faster. He was finding pace in that car, and it was just a matter of just drivers continuously improving times. There's like no reason to just state who was going fastest and
Yeah.
whatnot, because all of it was just every driver was going quicker. So then we
Yeah.
skipped to the end of Q1, which is kind of, or right before the end of Q1, which is when things started to heat up. We heard Max Verstappen complaining on the radio because
Yeah.
it seemed like it was starting to rain again, and so he was obviously really keen to get his lap out so that he wouldn't be caught in the rain and therefore wouldn't be able to improve his time. But then the
Yeah.
camera cut to around turn 8, I think. Yeah, it was turn 8, and we saw Sergio Perez in the barrier, and it was just, oh my god. The commentator's reaction said it all. Commentator was like, Perez, and just you can see the look on Christian Horner's face. I mean,
Yeah.
Perez is just run of bad performances seem to be continuing, because now he would be knocked out of Q1 and wouldn't be able to make Q3 again, and so in that RB20, so really, really unfortunate for him.
Yeah, and Red Bull just having a poor like few minutes as it is, with on one side of the garage Verstappen complaining, foreshadowing what we would see come this rest of this weekend, but doing his first complaints of the weekend to his race engineer GP, and then just moments later Perez finding the barrier in similar conditions to what we saw at Silverstone. Of course, a drying track on both occasions, and then him just putting a wheel wrong and losing it. But yes, it's just very slight errors, but these slight margins are what define Formula One drivers from any other drivers in the world. So they should be able to keep it on the road like this. But it's such a rookie mistake for Perez to make, and one that you would definitely not need, especially with McLaren already looking quick. I mean, we could be looking at Red Bull's advantage in the Constructors' Championship be slashed in half this weekend. So
So after that red flag, then they only had a few minutes left to go, and obviously with the risk of rain approaching, it actually did start to drizzle a little bit. So these times needed to count. Interestingly, they had enough. They had disabled DRS, even though it was just barely raining. So these next laps were without DRS. So we saw Lance Stroll was the first one to finish their laps at the end of Q1. He went up to P4, and then we saw Daniel Ricciardo go up to P1. So while
yeah.
Sergio Perez was out in the bottom five, Ricciardo went up to P1. I don't know who was writing the script, but a really good lap from Ricciardo. And then we saw Hulkenberg go up from P20 to P6, Sonoda from 16 to 8. So you could see
Albon up to P5 too, so drivers were just improving.
the track was just continuously getting drier and drier. We saw then the kick Saubers. Zhou Guanyu could only go up to P16 from P20. Valtteri Bottas though went up to P10 from P20. So that was an amazing lap from Bottas to get his Sauber into Q2, and then Magnussen barely scraped by in P15. So at the end, the bottom five that we lost were Perez and Russell, Zhou Guanyu, and then the Alpines, Ocon and Gasly. And it was really strange with George Russell, because
Yeah.
he had made a mistake kind of earlier in the session, and so he put them in the position to be in the bottom five. But then for some reason, Mercedes didn't fill up enough fuel to
Yeah, that was
let him
strange.
finish the runs, which was just really bad coordination from team and driver. So ultimately pretty unfortunate for Russell.
Well, if you want to talk about bad coordination, look at Alpine. I mean, they kept their drivers in the garage thinking that they would be safe, but every single driver on track improved. So Alpine
That is
just
true.
they couldn't do anything but just watch their drivers fall all the way to the bottom, and so that is pretty bad coordination.
So now going on into Q2, then Verstappen had currently the fastest time, and as they were finishing their laps, we saw Fernando Alonso go up to P6. So kind of in danger, but kind of in the middle of it. Lando Norris then crossed the line, and he went fastest by 2/10 over Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
So again, just kind of showing Norris was always kind of 2/10 ahead of Verstappen in the Red Bull. Then we saw Yuki Tsunoda drop from go up from 13 to P8. So both RBs were currently in the top 10. Then we saw Valtteri Bottas. He was only able to go up to P11, but still a brilliant lap if you consider his machinery he's in. We saw Kevin Magnussen. He tried to improve from P15. He couldn't improve, as Nico Hulkenberg stayed P11, and Lewis Hamilton, who hadn't improved on his P10, barely scraped through, as neither of the Williams could improve on that P10 that Hamilton occupied. So Hamilton would just barely make it through. So both Aston Martins and both RBs as well made it through. So that was brilliant showing from both those teams.
Yeah, Mercedes got really lucky there, or else it wouldn't have been a happy debrief at all if Russell out in Q1 and then Hamilton out in Q2.
So now going on into Q3, then the first times were set. Obviously, Verstappen went fastest at the first time, and you could see him. This was funny to see. You could see him immediately go right as soon as he crossed the line to avoid giving Lando Norris any sort of like slipstream, as Norris started his lap right as Verstappen finished his. So then we saw Oscar Piastri go 3 tenths behind Max Verstappen, and Sainz went behind them. I think that was just tire difference though,
Yeah.
because the McLaren definitely had more pace. Then we saw Lewis Hamilton. He crossed the line and he went ahead of Carlos Sainz into P3, and then Charles Leclerc went up to P3 as well. So kind of drivers just staying around 3 tenths behind Max Verstappen's time.
Yeah.
But then we saw Lando Norris, who on equal tires went fastest overall and put 3 tenths ahead of Verstappen. So just Norris definitely looking like the man to take pole position.
Yeah, and going on to the final set of runs now, Piastri would set his final time of the session, and he went up to only to P2, 2/100ths off his teammate Lando Norris. So it was looking really good for Norris and McLaren. Sainz was on two personal best sectors, and he went up into P4 on his new tires. So it was a really strong effort from Carlos Sainz. But Max Verstappen now, he would be looking to take pole position from Norris, but he couldn't do it, and he couldn't even beat Piastri as well. It was only P3 for Max Verstappen, and so that would be super disappointing for himself and for Red Bull as well, because Sergio Perez out in Q1 and you have McLaren 1 and 2 in really good position to take a 1-2 in the race and to have some really good team tactics in terms of strategy. But just as Verstappen finished his lap, we saw Yuki Tsunoda find the barriers at
Turn 6.
yeah, at turn 6, and as we thought Sonoda would be looking to prove himself to Red Bull, he instead proved that he was crash worthy with a pretty
Pretty hefty crash.
yeah, very
He got
bad crash.
wide. He got wide on the exit of turn 5,
It
and
was a
then that
pretty
just
stupid crash too, because he kind of dug a wheel out wide when he was pushing way too hard. But
I mean, yeah, obviously Sonoda trying to fight, like you said,
yeah,
proof for that seat, but then he just made kind of a careless error and he went wide, and that had
yeah,
a pretty sizable crash. So I mean, this was looking really good for Daniel Ricciardo, who
yeah.
currently Q3 both Perez and Sonoda crashed, and Ricciardo
Hmm.
ended up out qualifying Sonoda because Sonoda couldn't finish his lap. So
Yeah.
obviously looking good for Ricciardo at this moment, but obviously the race is where the points were scored. But because of that crash that Sonoda had, the red flag came out, and the Aston Martins and Ricciardo couldn't finish their laps, having just started on new tires, and so obviously they were in the middle of their laps, and
It
they
started
took off.
raining too at the end, so that's why most drivers just ended up staying in the garage after that.
But then they also took off a lot of tire wear on their tires,
Yeah.
so it essentially became used tires, and so none of the drivers could improve on their times after the red
Except
flag,
Ricardo, he was the only one.
except
Yeah.
Ricardo, yeah, and so then we saw Alonso get really mad afterwards. You could just
Mm-hmm.
see him because he was annoyed that the FIA threw that red flag right before he was about to finish the lap. I mean, I know his frustration. I can see where it's from, but like
I
at the
think he
same
was.
time,
I think he was frustrated. Are you talking about when he came into the paddock and stuff in Park Farme?
yeah.
I think that was because that he was instructed by the FIA or something to go park in Park Farme, despite there being enough
Oh
time
yeah,
to
yeah.
go out for another lap, but he instead got out of his car, which meant that was it for his session. He couldn't get back in the car, take it back to the pits. So I think that was why he was really upset, because he could have got another lap in, but he couldn't.
So just kind of another bad coordination between
Yeah,
FIA and the team. So Alonso's obviously frustration, and then also it was just really unfortunate for him because he felt he could have gone higher than that, but he would be starting, I think, in like where was it, like P8 or something.
yeah, not where he would want to be. That's for sure.
P7, yeah. So then going on into this race, this was definitely one of the craziest races of the
Yeah.
year.
So going on now to see whether Lando Norris could finally have a really good start from pole position. He's had somewhat of a habit of bottling all his pole positions, so we would have to see. And as the lights went out, immediately we saw what we've seen so far, and Lando Norris just bottling the start as usual, and Piastri was right there, and also was Max Verstappen. So it was going to be three wide going into that infamous turn one, and Piastri had the inside line, and he was able to take the lead ahead of Norris, and Norris kind of ran Verstappen off the road. But of course, I would classify that as a racing incident, because Norris couldn't really do anything about it, but Verstappen did use the wide line to retake that position ahead of Norris. And now Hamilton was getting in on the action as well as Charles Leclerc too. So Norris, his start went from really good to really bad, and he was now down in P4, but he quickly made it P3 as he got past Hamilton again.
Yeah, and straight away Norris was on the radio saying
Hmm.
Verstappen overtook off the track, and then
Yeah.
Verstappen was like, "No, I got forced off." So immediately then there were a lot of radio messages back and forth between that. Definitely not the least of the radio messages
Yeah.
or the last of the radio messages we would see. But then in the end, Verstappen did end up just giving the place back to Norris so that they wouldn't have to give him
Hmm.
any penalties or whatnot.
Yeah, and so this was like, it's kind of what we've seen so far throughout the season between Red Bull and McLaren fighting each other. But over the radio, we've seen immediately when these two fight each other, they go straight to the radio. Someone did this wrong, someone did that wrong. So of course we would see that more to come. But going on to lap three, then we saw Carlos Sainz going for the move on Fernando Alonso into turn one, and he was able to get past his fellow countrymen, and now he would chase after his teammate Charles Leclerc. And at this point, we could see quickly now that the soft tires were starting to degrade.
And so, obviously, then drivers were thinking about pit stops already in lap three, and that just shows you how high the tire wear is, around the Hungaroring because,
Yeah.
this track is just killer when it comes to tires. So the soft tires degrade really fast. And so on lap four, then we saw Max Verstappen led by Lando Norris, like we talked about earlier, and between after that on lap seven, we saw the tire runners pit and go onto the hard tires. Except we also saw Daniel Ricciardo pit, and he was on
Yeah.
medium tires. And later on, we found out in the race that that's not at all what Ricciardo wanted to do. It was just
Hmm.
a catastrophical screw up from RB's pit wall, because that
Yeah.
completely ruined Ricciardo's race. Because instead of being put into clean air when the soft runners pit, Ricciardo was instead pitted on lap seven on medium tires,
Hmm.
and then he was released into a bunch of traffic where he just got stuck in a DRS tray, and so that ultimately ruined Daniel Ricciardo's race.
Yeah, and at this point, going on now into lap 22, Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz made their pit stops too, and we would see Oscar Piastri take the lead of the race, and he was kind of in control of this race, but he was making a little bit of mistakes here and there, but for the most part, he had this race under control by lap 33. And going on to lap 35, then we saw Max Verstappen attacking Lewis Hamilton, but he couldn't do anything going into turn one. But Hamilton locked up then, and this gave Verstappen the opportunity to use DRS and try to go around the outside, but he just ran very, very wide and off onto the marbles, and Hamilton was able to keep that place. And Verstappen, this is when things started to boil over. He was really upset after this.
Yeah, I mean the commentators were just completely like just constantly saying it. They were saying, "Oh, Verstappen, he needs more sleep because he stayed up until he was up at like 3 a.m. doing a sim race." And I think it was kind of just stupid for them to keep saying that because
Yeah.
they didn't say anything when he won at Imola and he did the same thing. So obviously, yes, he probably was maybe needed some more sleep, but I mean he's a grown adult, like he doesn't need to be told what he needs and what he doesn't. So
Yeah.
I think definitely he was just also I think he would have been just as mad at this strategy
Hmm.
because Verstappen was just annoyed at the strategy he was given.
Yeah, so going on into lap 41, then we saw Hamilton now come into the pits, and this is kind of where stuff kicked off for McLaren because Oscar Piastri, he ran a little bit wide, so his cushion was now gone between himself and Lando Norris of about, it was like 5 or 6 seconds, and now it was just 1.5 seconds. So Hamilton came in to box from P3. So now this is McLaren had a decision to make, and they chose to pit Lando Norris first so that he could cover off the attacking Lewis Hamilton, because as we know, the undercut is extremely powerful here in Hungary, as we saw in 2019 when Hamilton had that amazing drive to get past Max Verstappen with like 3 laps to go and win the race. So McLaren decided to box Norris first, and um they didn't have, and McLaren didn't have that gap, as I said before, with him and Piastri. So they knew that boxing Norris would essentially mean handing the lead to Lando Norris because of how powerful the undercut is. So this is where the stuff kind of kicked off for McLaren.
Yeah, and they told Piastri, like, don't worry, we've got it managed. But obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Piastri was apprehensive because Lando Norris didn't seem like he would want to
Yeah.
give up a win, obviously, after having missed out on so
Mm-hmm.
many wins. Like, despite Oscar Piastri being in control for all of this race, Norris, we didn't
Yeah.
think would want to give up that win. And so on lap 48, Oscar Piastri made his pit stop, and like we all predicted, Lando Norris came out ahead of him by like 3 seconds or something.
Yeah. A
And
very
so
sizable lead.
and so it was just absolutely disastrous for Oscar Piastri, who had controlled the race. He was now behind his
Mm-hmm.
teammate in the net P2 because Norris would be the net P1. And so this is where we saw then for these next 20 laps we saw Will Joseph, Lando Norris's race engineer, just babying Norris and trying to persuade him to give the lead back to Oscar Piastri. It was
Yeah.
really embarrassing to see, honestly,
From
because he was
McLaren.
just
Yeah.
saying like, "Oh, think about like to win the championship, you'll need Piastri, you'll need the whole team behind you, and please think about like if you when you see Piastri at every Sunday meeting we have, that look he's gonna have on his face because you didn't give him that win." It was just a lot of nonsense in that, and so it was just really poorly managed and honestly quite embarrassing for McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in Lando Norris's shoes, me personally, I wouldn't have let Piastri by. Because here would be my logic, and what Norris's logic, I assume, would be Norris didn't ask the team to pit him first. He didn't just come into the pits by himself and say, and force the team to service him first. No, the team chose to pit him first. So why should Norris give up the lead? Because the team made that decision. If the team really wanted Piastri to win, they would have brought him in first and dealt with it later. So if I was Norris, I wouldn't have let Piastri by. But
Yeah, I mean,
obviously, yeah.
it was definitely a crucial moment. Like, obviously, we've seen the great champions like Vettel, Schumacher, Alonso. They wouldn't have given up the
Yeah,
place.
they certainly wouldn't have given up.
But
Yeah.
then you have team players like Valtteri Bottas who would have instantly given, like Valtteri
Hmm.
Bottas, Rubens Barrichello. They all would have given
Mark
up the
Webber.
position. I don't know if Mark Webber would.
Yeah, maybe pre multi 20.
Yeah. But then it was definitely interesting to see then what Lando Norris would end up doing. A pivotal moment we would see about what his mentality would be, and
Hmm.
obviously what we're all kind of considering is a championship charge from him and McLaren.
Yeah. But going on into lap 50, then we saw Max Verstappen come into the pits from the lead and pit onto a new set of tires, and he would come out all the way in P5, but of course on really good new tires. And we saw on lap 54 now like a really aggressive radio from Max Verstappen when GP said to him, "Well, that's some gentle introduction." Verstappen just immediately just started shouting at his engineer, almost saying, "No, mate, don't give me that blank. You gave me this blank strategy, okay?" And he was just really, really annoyed and pissed off about this whole situation because of how early, like the first stop, Red Bull kind of left it early for that overcut, and then now he waited really late for this overcut. So
Yeah.
he was just really annoyed with how the whole situation was unfolding for them.
He was just super mad at how they let themselves get undercut not once but twice, and then
Yeah,
combine that with the lack of performance these new upgrades have given him. Now they
yeah,
don't have the quickest car anymore, and so
yeah.
that's definitely going to be really annoying for Verstappen. And obviously now with the new engine regulations and the new regulations of
Hmm.
2026, this would be critical to see how Red Bull could treat Verstappen because they want to keep him for as long as they can. But obviously, there's been
Yeah.
links to him going to Mercedes for those new 2026 regulations.
Hmm.
So Verstappen just wants to be left to do what he wants to do by himself, which is just drive as hard as he can without worrying about how the team wants to treat how the team wants him to treat the tires and things like that. But going on to lap 57, then we saw Verstappen finally be able to get past Charles Leclerc down the inside at turn one, and then Verstappen would be setting up after Lewis Hamilton. And while all this was going on, like we talked about earlier, the
Hmm.
McLaren radio messages of just Will Joseph trying to tell Verstappen to or tell Norris to let Piastri by, just continual embarrassment from McLaren.
Yeah, and on lap 63 now, Norris still hadn't let Piastri by, but Verstappen was now getting very close to Hamilton and going for that podium position. He sent it up the inside at turn one, but then of Lewis Hamilton, but then he just locked up both his tires and he went straight over the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, reminiscent of Monza 2021. Actually, ironically, the last time McLaren were in a 1-2 position, but Verstappen just went over the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, and he took severe damage. Of course, he didn't retire, but it was just he lost so much time. He lost enough time to where Leclerc, who at one point was 4 seconds back on the both of them, was now past Max Verstappen and up into P4. So it was just a very careless mistake from Max Verstappen, who locked up both of his tires and just ran wide, and his Red Bull got launched into the air. So he was definitely driving a little bit angry.
Yeah, I think that was just the final straw. Like,
Hmm.
Red Bull were definitely really pissed off with him after that, because unlike unusual to see
Yeah.
Verstappen nowadays throw away points like
Hmm.
that. So Verstappen fell down to P five, and he was actually just 2 points 2 places ahead of his teammate Sergio
Yeah.
Perez, who had clawed his way back up through the field through some strategical brilliance and good driving by
Hmm.
Red Bulls on Perez's side. And
Yeah.
so both Perez and Russell had been able to use their car's
Hmm.
pace and fight all the way up back into the top 10. So that's, especially for Perez, exactly what he wanted to do for Red Bull.
Yeah, and going on to lap 67, finally we saw Lando Norris let Oscar Piastri by down the main straight, and Piastri was able to take the lead back from his teammate Lando Norris, and finally the order had been reinstated at McLaren, and so all of that babying that Will Joseph did to Lando Norris paid off in the end. But going on to the final lap, then lap 70, Oscar Piastri, I mean, deservingly, would I have let him by? No, but Piastri nonetheless deserved this race win. And the first,
Are you also in F1? No.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. But Oscar Piastri, the first driver to be born outside the 20th century, would take a win. He was a champion in F3, like they say, a champion in F2, and now a Formula One winner. And he won the Hungarian Grand Prix with a really strong drive, apart from that middle mess. But he overall controlled this race and deserved the race win. It was a 1-2 for McLaren with Lando Norris on the podium, taking their first 1-2 since Monza 2021. And once again, it's Norris in P2 behind an Australian. And Lewis Hamilton took a brilliant podium in P3 for Mercedes. So now it's safe to say that F1 is really back.
Yeah, and this was really deserving win for Oscar
Hmm.
Piastri. Obviously, I think but the way this was handled, both the drivers would have deserved it. But I'm
Yeah.
glad Piastri got his first win now. But
Seven winners, right, this season?
yeah, 7 winners, first time since 2012 that's
Hmm.
happened. And so obviously though it should have been a really highly celebrated McLaren 1-2, but it's just overshadowed by this embarrassment of
Yeah.
making Norris look like a villain and making like overshadowing Piastri's first win in Formula One, which is supposed to be a really huge achievement and
Yeah.
celebrated by many people. But McLaren just kind of really messed it up, and they, like I said this last time as well, they have a championship winning car, but without a championship winning pit wall. So they just need to sort out all that mess. But behind
Yeah.
them, Leclerc would be pretty happy with that P4, honestly,
Very
considering
happy, I'm sure.
where they were early in the weekend. Verstappen P5, nothing to be said about that. Just a weekend to forget for him. Carlos Sainz would be P6. I think he'd be okay with that. Then came Sergio Perez seventh and George Russell eighth. They would be delighted with those results, but obviously, delighted that they made up that many positions. But then just needed to work on that qualifying. They would also be in the back of their head like, oh,
Yeah.
what could have been if I'd qualified higher. And then we saw Yuki Tsunoda and Lance Stroll completing the points. Tsunoda obviously a brilliant drive to go to stay in the points while his teammate Ricardo got screwed over by the
Yeah.
RB strategy. Nevertheless, Tsunoda delivering points for RB and Lance Stroll getting 1 point for Aston Martin, and I think they're definitely just not gonna be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Alonso would be very upset to get P11 outside the points, but nonetheless, it was a really good race in my opinion. From a spectator's point of view, it was really enjoyable to watch. But that's pretty much it for this episode. And be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the final race before the summer break, the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Thank you.